Hey everybody, welcome to the Mana Leak. I'm John as always, and it's time for my Shadows over Innistrad pre-release recap. I was at two pre-releases this weekend at the Gamers Emporium in London, Ontario, my local game store. We had the first pre-release on Saturday, which was nearly a record, or at least a recent record for our entire city, and we've got a lot of game stores here. We had 62 players at our Saturday pre-release, the biggest we've had, the biggest in our city for quite a number of years, since Theros, I believe someone was saying. Sunday was a much smaller one, much more intimate, if you will. We had only 22 people, although a lot of people dropped in the first round, so we went down to a smaller number after that. I had two very, very different experiences at these two pre-releases as far as sealed pools and results were to go. But both pre-releases were awesome. The big pre-release had a ton of door prizes, mostly loot crate stuff, which you've seen on my channel because, of course, I get the loot crate as well. The shop owner gets the loot crate and uses them as pre-release prizes. And, of course, we had the lanterns and all the other Shadows over Innistrad pre-release atmosphere materials that we gave away as prizes. Very generous prize payouts. The top 8 each got 11 packs. The 9th through 16th place each got 4 packs. Great prizes. Definitely good to see. Tons of new players as well, and yeah, it made for one heck of a long weekend. The Saturday event, because it was so big, was 6 full rounds. Luckily, there was no cut to top 8, and the following day was 5 full rounds. A long, long day. I was exhausted by the end of it, but fun times were had by all. So definitely a big, big thanks to Sean at the Gamers Emporium for hosting a couple of great pre-releases. We also had a third pre-release that I judged for a little bit but didn't partake in. We did a two-headed giant pre-release the Sunday morning. It looked interesting, but not as good as the Oath of the Gatewatch two-headed giant format was, which makes sense because, of course, it was designed to be that way. Now, not only did we have a bunch of new players and a ton of people, we also had a special guest. We had Liliana herself, or at least Pretty Wreck Cosplay's interpretation of Liliana. Pretty Wreck Cosplay is a big name cosplayer here in London, Ontario. She does a ton of the Canadian conventions around, and her father is actually a player at the store as well. She was nice enough to do a fantastic interpretation of Liliana, and she was there to take pictures with all of the players at the tournament that day. Absolutely fantastic cosplay. I heard it took her 70 hours of work to put together the costume. Looked fantastic, so thanks to Pretty Wreck Cosplay as well for being at the pre-release and making it one heck of a pre-release experience. But let's talk about my pre-release and how they both went. One, I will say, was much better than the other. But without further ado, let's get to that first pre-release recap. So the first pre-release on Saturday, I got my pre-release kit, and I excitedly opened it to see what cards were in there and how awesome my pool was going to be. And staring me in the face was a promo Foreboding Ruins, which is not amazing. Getting a dual land, of course, is not what you want to see as your promo, although it is super useful. But then I cracked open my packs, and I looked at the rares, and I saw a Fevered Visions, and a Corrupted Graphstone, and a Slayer's Plate, and an Ever After. I did then see an Elusive Tormentor, a Falconwrath Gorger, and a Markov Dread Knight, so there were 3 goodish cards. Some of them very good. Elusive Tormentor can be fantastic, as can Markov Dread Knight. Falconwrath Gorger is much more narrow, but those other cards, Corrupted Graphstone, hate it. Fevered on Vision, super hate it. Slayer's Plate, begrudgingly playable. Ever After, not a fan of how much mana that costs, although it can do some work if you have things worth returning. So I went through the rest of my cards and sorted out all my removal and was staring at a pile of 2 cards. I had 2 pieces of removal in the entire pool for all of the commons and uncommons that are removal or bounce effects or permanent tap effects, etc. I had 2. I had Humble the Brute and I had Puncturing Light. 2 pieces of conditional white removal, one of which I would argue is really more of a sideboard card, that being Humble the Brute. So I realized, well, I'd better play white. So I looked at all my white cards and there was next to nothing. There was Chaplain's Blessing, the gain 5 life card. There was a bunch of really mediocre creatures and nothing else. White was unplayable. So I looked at the other rares that I had, and I did have the 3 vampires. I had the Tormentor, the Dread Knight, and the Gorger. So I thought, well, maybe I can force vampires. So I looked at my black and red. No red removal. In fact, out of 2 pools, I have not seen a Fiery Temper. For being a common, that seems strange. But I was able to hobble together a black-red vampires deck with a minor madness theme. I had I had a Mad Prophet. But the real star of the show was Uncaged Fury. I had 3 of them. I only played 2. And I had 2 grotesque mutations. So I was able to, in the games that I won, usually attack in for 16 completely on surprise. I would attack in, and I would just hope that my opponent didn't block my 3-3, and when they didn't, my 3-3 suddenly became a 6-4, and then it became a 7-5 double strike, and it would hit for 14 lifelink. I think the biggest I did was 18 off of a single creature, and that's how I won basically every single game. If I did not successfully do that, I did not win. So my matchups were kind of all over the board. Some slower decks, some full of removal decks, some aggressive decks. But I ended up winning my first match barely. I barely won out against an Invocation of Saint Traft, but I managed to hold on and, surprise, surprise, hit her for 16 twice. And that finished both of those games. Match 2, my opponent was able to kill my creatures. And if my creatures died, I didn't have a deck, I didn't have a game plan, and I lost. Game 3, surprise, surprise, I hit for 16 a couple of times and won. Game 4, they controlled my creatures. Game 5, I hit for 16. Match 5, match 4, match 5. Match 6, they killed my creatures. So, my deck really had a single strategy to win that was totally interruptible, and I really didn't have many other options. My green was okay. There were no rares for it. There were some good uncommons. I did have a couple of Pack Guardians, but there wasn't much else going on there. Almost no werewolves of any real, note that I would want to play. Just nothing really there. Black-green could have been an option, but I think black-red and kind of do what my pool was able to do, and that was hit in for 16 completely by surprise. So unfortunately, I ended up going 3-3 and ended up finishing 25th out of 62, which is good enough. But that's about as good as I think that deck could do. I did have a lot of people responding to me saying that I had a bad deck, saying, how can you have a bad deck? You're at table 8 in the last round. You can't have a bad deck. That's not possible. Well, no, I had a bad deck, but I'm a pretty good player. So I was 50-50. If I had a bad deck and was a bad player, I would be at the bottom tables. It's going to be pretty rare that a good player ends up at the bottom tables just because they have a bad deck. They're still able to do things with it, as I was able to do things with mine. Unfortunately, it was totally in my opponent's control as to if they were able to interrupt it or not, and at least 3 people were. But that wrapped up my first day. I did not place. I did not get prizes. 25th out of 62. Womp, womp, womp. So I moved on to the next day, Sunday afternoon. I got to my store and I opened up my pack and I looked at my promo, and what was staring at me? A Hanweir Militia Captain. Well, that's significantly better than a dual land. That's a bear, and it can become bigger and pump out tokens, so that was awesome. I cracked open my packs, and I saw a Burn from Within, so I thought, all right, at least I've got a piece of removal. And then my next pack had a Declaration of Stone. I had 2 pieces of removal. Third pack, a Flameblade Angel. All right, I'm still in 2 colors off of 4 rares. Next up was a Forgotten Creation. Well, that goes into a different color, but it's still a really good card. And then I got a Harness the Storm, which immediately went into the trash pile. And then I opened finally in my last pack a Westvale Abbey, which of course goes incredibly well, both flavor and mechanics-wise, with Hanweir Militia Captain. And there was also a Sorin in that pack, Mr. Sorin Markov himself. In the rest of the packs and the rest of the cards, there was plenty of removal. No Fiery Tempers, unfortunately, but I did have an Angelic Purge. I did have a Puncturing Light, a Bound by Moonsilver, a Reduced to Ashes. I had removal. I had stuff that I could actually do. And I had a nice amount of aggressive creatures. I had an Abyssinian Missionaries and True Faith Censor, which was just playable enough to activate my Abyssinian Missionaries. I had some nice aggressive werewolves in red. It was a pretty solid deck. I was pretty darn happy with it. Unfortunately, there were no dual lands. There was no way to really reliably splash for Sorin. Yeah, I could have just thrown in 3 swamps or so and hurt my mana base a bit to get Sauron out. And yes, he's super powerful, but I really value consistency. As I'm sure most of you know after watching my set reviews, I value consistency. I don't like randomness. So I chose to just leave Sauron in the sideboard and go for the pure consistency of a nice 8-8 split. Red and white mana, and then of course my 17th land was the Westvale Abbey. So how did I do on Sunday? Well, I got all super excited and ready to play round 1, and I was paired up against Brad, one of the better players at the store, although he does play a lot more standard than he does play limited, but a fantastic player. And my deck said, hey, you're not going to play this match. I had to mulligan to 5 and keep a really sketchy hand, and then my second match, I just drew every single land I had on hand. I got beaten pretty handily. I tried to hold out, but it turns out those 1/3 Skulk Lifelinkers are really, really, really good, and he trounced me pretty darn hard. Round 2, I got the bye. I was able to just not play and take a free win, which was, slightly annoying to stand there for 50 minutes and not play, although it did allow me to walk around and be a judge. And hey, free win is a free win. Round 3, I was up against a somewhat aggressive-ish green-white deck with Sigarda, but due to some mana issues and to some slight misbuild issues on his part, the deck didn't quite fire off too well. I was able to remove the threats and just get in for a lot of damage pretty darn quick. Match number 4, I was up against a deck that I had not heard the rumors about. I had not heard what was in this deck. And then on turn 4, I got hit by a Startled Awake, and 13 of my cards went to the graveyard. And then I started to worry about, when is he going to return it? And then on turn 5, he cast his second Startled Awake, milling another 13 cards from the top of my deck. I had 3 cards left in my library. Thankfully, however, he was casting Startled Awakes for 2 turns. He wasn't establishing his board, and I was able to just stomp right in and hit him for 20 damage over the course of 2 turns. So it really didn't matter to me that I was being milled so heavily. I was able to win out in that first game. Second game, however, I knew what he had. I knew what could potentially come at me. And so I definitely was worried that if I didn't finish that game fast, there was an extremely real chance of me getting milled out. Again, I got hit with a turn 4 Startled Awake, and I thought, turn 5, this might be the end, because I did not have as commanding a board presence as I did this time around. But turn 5, he returned Startled Awake to the graveyard, showing me that he did not have one in his hand. And I had a Bound by Moonsilver, which I threw on that thing very hard, and it was just totally negated. That Startled Awake was out of the equation, and it took me several more turns, but I was able to get through without him drawing his next Startled Awake. It was thankfully on the bottom, as we checked afterwards. Finally, round 5, I was up against the only undefeated person in the entire tournament. Due to wonky numbers and a few draws that were happening, there was one single undefeated person, and I got the pair up, he got the pair down, and so we actually just ended up drawing. I could have won, and I potentially could have taken first, although due to the fact that I was a pair down, tiebreakers may have still meant that I only got second place. The draw, however, absolutely guaranteed me 4th place at worst, and so I did take the draw there. His deck was pretty darn good, so I'm kind of happy that I didn't have to face it, although I was pretty happy with my deck. I think if it wasn't for the significant mana issues that I had in round 1, I think things would have gone pretty okay. But they didn't, unfortunately. Overall, I'm interested in Shadows over Innistrad as a format and how it will evolve, especially as we get to the draft portion of the format and can put Sealed kind of to the back burner. I won't say that I was impressed with the Sealed format. It definitely felt like the pool very strongly determined how well you would do. Maybe it was just because I got such a bad pool with 2 pieces of removal that weren't even that good in and of themselves. If that doesn't happen terribly often, which I can't imagine because there is so much common and uncommon removal, then I don't think the Sealed format will be too bad. But I do feel like it is somewhat pool dependent. I will definitely, of course, be doing a pre-release on Magic Online for you all to watch, and I'll be doing at least a couple sealed leagues as well until I can sort of suss out how this sealed format is going to shape up. But of course, the main draw is going to be draft, which I'm super excited to do Friday night at our first F&M for Shadows over Innistrad. And you guys, of course, will get to see that Saturday. You will get to watch over my shoulder as I draft Shadows over Innistrad. Overall, what do I think of the format mechanics? Well, Delirium as expected, it didn't really seem to be turned on all that much. The people who I did see it turn on were being very aggressive with their self-mill. And ultimately, many of them didn't do terribly well, and I think it's because they didn't have the incredible delirium bombs. And I think delirium is going to be something that you are A, going to have to very carefully and very explicitly build for, and B, you're going to need to play cards that are good without delirium, and then get better with delirium. If they're not good before you have delirium, I do not think that they're playable. Obviously, not at all in a non-delirium deck, and not even that well in a dedicated delirium deck. Madness definitely felt good. It definitely felt good, but as expected, and as I said, you want to make sure that you're getting free Madness outlets. So I had a Markov Dread Knight and I had a bunch of Madness cards, but paying 3 mana to discard a card meant that I rarely got to play the Madness card. I rarely was able to throw away a Madness card and cast it with the mana that I had left over, unless it was something, or hypothetically was a Fiery Temper, which of course I didn't have. Now I also had a Mad Prophet. Now that feels good because it was a free discard outlet. All I had to do was tap a creature. So I definitely stand where I did in the set review that the free Madness enablers are significantly better than the pay mana Madness enablers, whether that be casting a spell or be that activating an ability for some chunk of mana. Transform, of course, functioned exactly as I thought it would because I have a lot of experience with it. I played heavily in Draft in the original Innistrad. As always, werewolves are not something that you should pass the turn to flip. If there's something else that you could do, you should let your opponent be the one who flips the cards, or you pass the turn without casting a spell because you can't cast a spell, or because you're holding up some sort of instant speed removal or something like that. But if there's a creature that you can play on curve, play that creature. Don't pass the turn to flip a werewolf. That is losing just a ton of value and ton of equity in your matchup. But yeah, I'm definitely very excited about this format to see how it goes. I think the cards play very well, and I'm excited to see what kind of archetypes can come out of Draft. I'm also excited to take a Fiery Temper. I'll first pick one if I see it, just because I haven't seen one yet somehow in 12 packs. But definitely let me know how your pre-release went down in the comments below. Was it a big pre-release? How big was it? 62 is a pretty big one here in London. I know some big cities have 150-person tournaments, but let me know how big yours was, what your promo card was, what your MVP was, what cards underperformed. Let me know everything about your pre-releases down in the comments below. But as always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can find me on Twitter at The Mana Leak. That's L-E-E-K, like the vegetable, not the card. And you can also find me on Facebook at facebook.com/The Mana Leak. You've already found me here on YouTube. You've got that comment section down below, so please make use of that as well. If you enjoy my videos, you should click that little thumbs up icon to let me know that you like them, and click subscribe so that you can know when all of the latest videos come out. We will have a Crack-a-Pack Tuesday tomorrow of Shadows over Innistrad. We will have a Wacky Wednesday with Legendary Cube. We will have a Top 10 Thursday focused on Shadows over Innistrad. And of course, Saturday, as I said, we will have a behind-the-shoulder draft and draft recap from me from my local store. But as always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, see y'all next time.